too much premature and undignified Black death. But we also have joy. And we also eke out hope. But we are grieving people because of all that we know. And the rub is we must know all of it in order to survive. Those are some of the truths we have to speak to those in power. We have to say to them, your studied, dignified, civilized ignorance is killing us, and you know it. You might even like it. You might get joy from it. You might reap pleasure from the culture of Black death upon which your white life is built. But here's some truths that I come always to speak to and with my people, us. They may kill a lot of us, but they can't kill us all. They've been trying for nearly 400 years and they haven't succeeded yet. So I believe that we will win. But the difference between who gets killed and who doesn't won't have anything to do with your nice suit of clothes or your nice house or your fancy degrees or your fancy words. Now look, I know that's easy for me to say because everything about my life would suggest that respectability politics are a success. I played my position perfectly. Never acted up in school, never got in a fight, made mostly A's, graduated top of my class, have a great career. But I carry the trauma in other places. In high blood pressure, in a bit too much weight, in loneliness and the struggle to build a family, in the violent loss of a father as a young girl, in the countless male relatives I have seen fall victim to the prison industrial complex. We gotta get honest about the traumas that we carry rather than stunting with all the degrees all the time. Because we all need liberation. And I don't think that my degree has freed me from anything. It has just blunted the blow of some of the things that wanted to take me out in the first place. So one question I have for us is this. It's easy for all of us with our fancy degrees to come back into our communities and preach about how respectability politics won't save us. That's become a mantra of this movement, and it's right. But as we do so with our letters behind our names, our four-syllable words, and our middle-class paychecks, we gotta ask ourselves this. Once we take the few frameworks that our people have by which they don't feel totally at the whim of white supremacy, then what do we replace those frameworks with? See, it's easy to tell folks respectability won't save them. But look, you can't go out here and change a system that was built before you and is probably gonna be here after you, but you can make sure that your kid speaks like they got some sense and they look like they belong to somebody who loves them and that they can read, right? So we believe in those frameworks. Our folks are so deeply invested in the politics of respectability because it is the one bit of empowerment that we feel like we have in a system that we already know is designed for us to lose. We keep on talking to our folks like they don't know the system is against us. But we keep forgetting that we are people who've been shamed about our penchant for blaming the system. So part of what folks are doing when they invoke respectability is saying, I don't want to shunt my responsibility off on something I can't even see, right? I'm responsible for my children. I'm responsible for myself, right? That's powerful, and I know that that's part of the way my mama raised me. Yes, she dealt with indignities every day to make sure that we could make it, but the point is, she wanted me to live and make it. And in a world where a woman in the South with a high school diploma can't overcome white supremacy, she can make sure that her kid lives long enough to fight for it, right? So we got to figure out when we tell ourselves to stop being invested in respectability, what are we going to replace it with? How are folks going to feel empowered against a system that doesn't want us to win? Now the easy answer that people say is, the power is in the struggle. But all our folks ever do is struggle. So we owe these problems our best thinking, not our sanctimony, and not our easy answers. Telling folks that I've always struggled, well, I get joy out of struggle. I wanted to cuss right then. So here's a framework that I want us to remove. Here's another one. It's a framework that doesn't serve us well. Our belief that strong men will save strong communities is a lie.
All right. All right.
Patriarchy will not save us. Jordan Davis had a present father. Trayvon Martin had a present father. Michael Brown Jr. had a present father. All of these young men are gone, and their dads are in a fraternity that no man should ever have to be a part of. We exist in a system that says we are less than human. A system that asks us to concede the lie of our own pathology and indignity. And our quest for traditional families and the traditional trappings of success are so deeply tethered to our desire to prove to white folks that we are worthy of being treated as human beings. Newsflash, they're not going to do it. Whiteness won't allow them to. Individual whites might, thank you to the individual whites in the room. But whiteness doesn't have anything to do with black humanity. It cannot see, conceive of, or allow for black humanity. That's the challenge. So we have bought into a culture of patriarchy that makes us far more outraged about the killing of young men than about the killing and raping of our young women by law enforcement. But what Sandra Bland taught us in a way that we didn't quite seem to get with Ayanna Stanley Jones or Rakia Boyd or Tanisha Anderson is that gender is no protection against state violence.
Yes, yes.
Black communities now know, if they didn't know before, they don't just have to have the talk about police with the boys, they also have to have it with the girls. In the late 19th century, a community that I study quite a bit, when black communities of representative, well-educated men and women fought and struggled over the concepts of race manhood and race womanhood, they did so because they hoped the respectable performances of gender and family would mitigate and delimit the violent reach of white supremacy into their lives. In that same moment that lynchings increased astronomically, black men and women scaled racial obstacles by leaps and bounds. We got some of the first of everything: first college grads, first judges, first doctors, so forth. That moment is not fundamentally different from this moment. We have in the White House the text of 20th century black respectability in the Obama family. And we have dead black body upon dead black body in the cities and locales that reach beyond Washington. We are not in this position, though, because we have failed. That's not our failure. We are not in this position because we have failed to have good heterosexual marriages with white picket fences. We are in this position because white supremacy has fought to keep us here. The marvel is not that so many of us have succumbed, but rather that so many of us have made it. When we reckon with our beliefs about men leading, and that is a reckoning that we must do, particularly in the church. Particularly in the church, and I'm going to say it because I'm standing in a church. When we reckon with our beliefs about men leading, we will also challenge our homophobia and transphobia. Say that in the church too.
Come on.
I know that for many in our communities, learning new categories like, for talking about gender, words like cisgender, which means your genitalia and your gender performance match. So you're a woman and you have lady parts, right? So learning words like cisgender and transgender. You're a woman who doesn't have traditional lady parts. That's all it means. It's a learning curve. I get it. But the old gender categories won't protect us. Sandra Bland taught us that. Yes. Black women, sisters, it's up to us to change our community conversation around gender. Most brothers are too invested in the few crumbs they get from patriarchy to have a significant desire to change on this point. I'm not saying brothers are off the hook, I'm just saying that they usually won't change till we force them to. We cisgender black women who again, benefit from the match of outward and inward, know what it's like to have our gender identity disrespected. We know because we've watched Michelle Obama be disrespected and harassed for the last 8 years. She's had her body horrifically picked apart, over-sexualized, unfairly masculinized, and disrespected. We have watched her womanhood be a battleground. And it is precisely because our access to femininity has been a battleground for so many of us that we have become unfairly territorial towards transgender black women.
Yeah.
We have made their womanhood a battleground, not recognizing that every sister loses when we do that. We can do better. We ought to care about the epidemic of trans black women being murdered in this country. One named India Clark murdered the same week as Sandra Bland. And we ought to care about it because it turns out that it isn't the police doing the murdering in most of those cases, it's cisgender black men. And cisgender black women are well acquainted with the problem of intimate partner violence. So we have a coalition point with trans black women. So let me close. Patricia O'Collins argues that the guiding question for those of us who identify as black feminist thinkers is, what will it take to free black women? So those of us who are activists and scholars should be guided by a related question. What will it take to free black people? What will it take to free black people? That's the only question we should ask. That is the question we have in common. The scholar cannot answer that question without the activist. The activist cannot answer that question without the scholar. None of us can answer that question outside communities to which we are accountable. We are all co-conspirators in the project of black freedom. I think we begin to answer the question by looking at the individual context and asking ourselves, what kinds of things would need to exist in local communities so that Michael Brown would be alive today, and Sandra Bland, and India Clark, and Samuel DuBose in Cincinnati, and Rekia Boyd. And the answers to those questions are not just better trained police. The answers to those questions are safer communities, good jobs for parents, good successful schools, and far fewer prisons. We already know the answers, it's just about how do we bring these things about. But then, we must return back to the question of our own thinking. And if the question is, if the broad question is, what will it take to free us? I think we also have to ask an internal question too, a question at the level of ideology, a question at the level of belief, a question that calls into question our thinking, a question that, to invoke some church parlance, might cause us to repent, i.e. to think again, right? To think different. We must begin to ask this question that Sonia Sanchez asked in the 1970s. In the title of her play, she said, but how do it free us? But how do it free us? How do? And I'm just going to invoke what King called some ungrammatical profundity here. How do respectability free us? How do the presence of the police free us? See, I'm a childhood survivor of domestic violence, and so when I talk to my friends who want to abolish the prison system, they always say, you know, I tell them all the time, well, I've seen men do horrible things to women, and so I need the police because I need somebody to come and get this dude off the lady. But then I realized the police didn't ever keep my mama from being harmed. They actually didn't. My community didn't feel safer because the police came. So I'm struggling with that. Because I think we have to ask ourselves, do we really feel safe based upon the things that we're told we should feel safe with? Do the police make you feel more safe? I realize that they really don't make me feel more safe. That I was giving them credit for something they didn't do. So how do respectability free us? How do the presence of police free us? How do heteronormative ideas about family free us? Are we really more free if everybody got a married mom and daddy? Is that the only conception of family that we have? Because what I know is that most of the black folk in this room didn't come up with families that look like that. I know that statistically.
Come on.
And I don't just mean that you didn't have a daddy, because white folks get real upset if they had a daddy and you don't acknowledge that some black people had daddies. But your grandmama probably lived with you too. And a cousin that y'all were trying to help get on their feet. We've always had a more expansive conception of family than this stuff that white folks are talking about. And here's the thing, it's not working out for them either. Now the New York Times is writing articles about single sisters, single black, single women, and how that's the new norm. When it was single sisters, it's pathology. Single white women, and you know, we're having a revolution in the way Americans think about family. Well, we did know that black folks were from the future, though. Just don't get a lot of credit for that. How do our gods free us? How do our churches free us? How do our churches free us? How do our violences towards black folks, our brothers, our sisters, our siblings, free us? How does beating your child free you? If it don't free us, then it enslaves us. Say that one more time. If it don't free us, then it enslaves us. And we have nothing to lose but our chance. I'm done.
So Dr. Cooper has really laid it out there for us, and we want to receive questions that you may have for Dr. Cooper, questions that you may have for Dr. Cooper, and not a major narrative here. Scholars, I hope you know how to do this, and leaders, I hope you know how to do that. So are there questions for Dr. Cooper? And I'll bring the microphone so you can ask your question. Let's try it. Let's see if we can hear you up front.
Doctor, thank you for the very insightful speech that you gave. What I would like to know is this. Given the gravity of the situation of state-sanctioned police violence in black women, why is it that we as revolutionaries or activists need to keep trying to convince white folks of the danger that we're facing? Because they go back to their Eden light, permanent, concealed atmosphere, and we have target on our back. And we keep trying to convince them that they need to help us. So my question is, why do we need to keep trying to talk to white people who clearly see and understand what's going on? Should we not just divest ourselves of them and march forward like Sherman is marching to the sea?
You know, whiteness doesn't have much to commend itself to us. So I'm with you on that. But I think that, and I'm gonna pick on you just a little bit, brother. I think that we always have a brother who's like, white folks are irredeemable, and I think other than the few who are very, very conscious and working on it, that's not an unreasonable assessment. I think the problem is that we want to rush forward into revolution, not recognizing that it's not as simple as that. Look, when I talk to most black folks, I know very few black people that actually pursue sustained interactions with white people in their intimate lives. Really, think about it. We live in pretty segregated communities. Most of our kids go to segregated schools. Black folks don't have a romance with white people. But we also lack economic and political power, which means that we are forced to interact with white folks and to be victims of particular kinds of violence. Now, look, that's a very hard narrative. I think that there are some folks who would challenge me to be a bit more nuanced. I'm going to not do that right now. But I think that when we begin to talk about revolution, and I think we need revolution, but I'm not, brothers got to do some work before I'm going to before I'm going to run into revolution with y'all. Okay? Because y'all got to do some work around patriarchy and violence, and that stuff's important, and I feel like there's a whole lot of talk about revolution and not enough talk about patriarchy, which makes me think that conceptions of black liberation are still too limited. Also, I want to know what happens to the most vulnerable folk when we rush forward into our revolutionary praxis. And I'm not saying that staying, quote unquote, in league with white people protects our vulnerable folk, but I think we have to have a plan for that. And I don't think that we do that. Here's the other thing, and I'll say this, and this is the tension for me. I do keep trying to convince white folks. Call it the Christian in me that believes that people can actually change. Now, the scholar in me says, hell no, excuse my language. There's no history that makes me believe that. Right? But there's some part of me that still just thinks like, some of y'all can change. And that's a tension. That's a real tension. I'm going to own that tension. Right? I'm going to just be honest about that. Because for all the white folks that did me wrong, I had a couple white friends, just a couple. You know? And so what I'm more interested in is not a world in which we annihilate white people, because I think God creates all people. So I think part of the challenge is, how do we reconcile that? Everybody doesn't share my faith, so I don't think we all have to think about it from a faith context, but I do have to think about who we become in the context of a world where we divest ourselves of a belief in other people's humanity. Right? Who do we become then as moral actors? So that's not a comment on what I believe about self-defense. I believe if people come for you, then you should let them know that that was a bad idea. Right? Yeah. So we can keep talking about it. Yes.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. I wanted to ask a question back to the notion of policies and respectability when I say this. And I'm particularly intrigued with the idea that whereas Black folks in holdings towards policies and respectability can present polished representations of ourselves, but also function as self-policing tactics, right? In ways in which we become so critical of each other because we're not upholding some of these policies that they not only keep us from making these sorts of representations, but also make us somewhat self-surveillance. So I'm interested in you speak more to that.
Yeah, I think you spoke to it. You know, we so invested in, you know, look, some of the worst folks with policing are Black sisters. We care about what other sisters are wearing, how they speak, who they sleep with. I mean, and we do it in the name of Jesus. We do. But it's respectability. One of my big challenges is with the church is that we keep on acting like respectability is Christian theology. These are not the same. Right? So all the stuff about pulling your pants up and keep your legs closed, that's respectability. That ain't Christian theology. It's actually not. But part of the reason that a lot of sisters feel emboldened to respectability police is because they think they're doing God's work. And so I love messing with said sisters. Because many of them are miserable and lonely, and they think that their purpose on earth is to make other sisters fall in line. And my purpose on earth is to help Black folks get free. And that's what I understood Jesus' purpose on earth too. So, you know, put you on my list for that. So part of the work that we have to do is to show people what our theology looks like outside of a context of respectability, and to hold churches and communities of faith accountable for acting like outmoded political ideology that won't free us is what Jesus wants for us. That's bad thinking. But also, look, like, I'm not saying that I don't, look, sometimes you do have to be respectable. Sometimes I do have to dress up and play the game. I play it much less these days. I do. It's tiring and I'm not interested in it. And I'm just like, look, I'm smart. And in many cases, I'm better than you at this. And so I'm not going to do this with you. Real talk. But I get that we're in different contexts and it's necessary. I think the difference when I study respectability, because I write about the women who created the ideology of respectability. And they didn't believe that stuff wholeheartedly. They just saw Black folks getting lynched and they were like, how do we protect Black communities? But they always knew it was a strategy. So this is the kind of strategy I love. Mary Church Terrell was like one of the authors of respectability. Really. And she would go to protests in her 80s in a fur coat with a picket sign. view of this thing, that if you're a sister that really likes to be dressed up and put together, and you step into the room with polish, and they think that means one thing about you, and you open your mouth and a totally different thing happens, I'm here for it. Call it step revolution, just do it, right? So there's all kinds of ways to be about this thing. You just cannot believe that the cap and gown is a bulletproof vest. That's the problem. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm worried about the whole opportunity respectability because I do not think it is an either-or situation.
Right.
We can talk about and encourage respectability, and at the same time have serious critique of our religion and our system. I have been fighting the battle for pull up your pants for 2 years.
Yes.
And I'm still fighting the battle of pull up your pants. I see little boys in the grocery store with their shoes untied. And I ask them in their ear, can I tie up your shoes for you? Because you can't run with your shoes untied.
Right.
I tell young men I see with their pants ready, I tell them in their ear, why are your pants ready? And they always look at me and say, my mama tells me the same thing.
Right.
And I tell them, you can't run with your pants ready.
Right. Look, I agree.
There is a revolutionary aspect to this thing.
No, I disagree with that. So look, here's the thing. I was a kid when sagging pants became a thing. I remember when it became a thing in 1991 after Boys in the Hood dropped. I mean, there's a historic moment when sagging pants becomes a cultural moment. So the thing is, I don't want to see dudes' underwear. Please pull up your pants. But I think that we have to have a different conversation than it being about respectability. I think we should teach our folks to be respectful. That's not the same thing as being respectable, right? So that's one distinction. Two is, I think that we have to have a conversation with folks about who they see themselves as and the clothes that they wear. Absolutely. I think that's totally a community conversation, and I don't think that that's anti-revolutionary, right? But the problem is, here's the question I ask. There is no other fashion trend, not one, that has existed for 25 years continuously. Not one. Not one. But sagging pants. Sagging pants is the only fashion trend that came in as a trend and still exists a quarter century later. That tells me that it's not about a fashion trend. It's about something else. And we keep asking the wrong question. I want to know what it is about sagging one's pants that speaks to the way that young men see themselves, because I think that's a structural issue. And we keep on trying to address the structural challenge by talking about what is a mere easy sartorial fix. We figure out the mentality behind it, we'll change the sartorial stuff, the outward stuff, the clothing, the fashion. It is the one trend. We wore bright colors in 1990, whatever, in the early 2000s, we weren't doing that. We wore combat boots and girls dressed in more masculine dress in the mid-90s. Now that we don't do that. There is no fashion trend that I can look back over and see a 20-year continuous line other than sagging pants. And I'm tired of us talking about how it's that our folks don't respect themselves. And I want us to start talking about what about that is compelling. What are young men trying to tell us about their life possibilities, what they see for themselves, who they think they get to be, what kind of communities they get to be a part of? What are they telling us about what kinds of access to narratives of masculinity are available to them? Right? Because what we have seen in the last quarter century is a narrowing of possibility in terms of performances of black masculinity. And I'm a hip-hop feminist, and so I love hip-hop and I write about it, but I blame hip-hop for that. Hip-hop and structures together. I do think hip-hop is to be challenged for the way it has limited possibilities for how we think about what it means to be a black man. And I think that shows up in dress. And I hope that if Barack Obama does nothing else for us, that he will at least change the universe of possibility. for what it means to be a brother. But I don't think every brother needs to be Barack Obama. God knows that. Right? So, for me, that's what's at stake. That we want everybody to look real pretty and well put together, but my thing is, if your first encounter with me is to say something to me about how I look, then I'm not trying to hear you.
When I talk to young men about my culture and they tell me what their trouble is. I was in the Chinese store in my neighborhood. I live in St. Louis, Illinois. Poor community. I was in the Chinese store, said to the young man, if you have some hands down, I said, well, you know what? And then he went on to tell me his trouble. I think the young man just wanted somebody to say, I see.
Right. But what would have happened if you just simply said, young man, how's your day going today? Like, why did it, what I'm saying, what I'm challenging, sister, I'm glad that the interactions have been so positive for you, but I don't think that that is the way that we build a political program for us, right? And I don't think that, and I think that what I'm saying to you is that what you're talking about is that they needed human connection. And I'm saying that I want human connection that starts not when somebody looks at me and says, what's wrong with me? I want human connection that begins with a look in the eye, maybe a handshake, and hey brother, how you doing? Because here's the thing, when we build relationships with people, then we are in a position to share with people things that we think might help them. Because we've earned the right to do that. And so it works out for you probably because you have a loving demeanor when you say it, right? But everybody does it because everybody doesn't do it out of a spirit of love, and young people know that. Right? And so for me, there are questions about how we relate to each other in communities and how we do the work of affirming our value to each other, and that is critical and revolutionary work. But there is also the work of a political program, and that program can't be if the young man that just had his hands up, the cops would have shot him.
Yes.
Because we know that the cops beat the mess out of Martise Johnson in Virginia, a kid who was a student leader on the campus, because he gave the wrong zip code when they asked for his ID. And he didn't come to the club with his pants all sagging, as far as I know, and every picture I've seen of him is of him in a suit and a tie. So we keep talking about it. Yes, sir.
I've always loved you, brother.
Thank you.
Could you speak to, you alluded to at the beginning, the concept of respectability as it relates to the academy and how black scholars ignore each other or try to be the one that white folk are going to follow, and how these fights go on that really don't lead to, in terms of like my field of biblical studies, those of us who had degrees were either the only one in the program or one of two, the other one didn't make it. And a number of my colleagues accept the fact that other people would like me would be, so how do we deal with respectability within the academy?
Yeah.
And the way in which we relate to each other and deal with each other?
Yeah, I think it's an old saying, all of our skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? Look, white supremacy is very powerful, and it hands out carrots to those Negroes who will do its bidding. And it extracts a high price from those Negroes who won't. And so sometimes, I think we just have to say that. So look, I don't know that there's a whole lot of transforming those people. I don't spend my time thinking about them. Usually when I'm in my first job, my new job, we have lots of black folks with power and they use it for good, and I'm thankful for that. It's rare. At my first job, that was not the caliber of the black folks who were there. And so I just figured out who they were. And I was like, okay, I see who you are. I'm not here to try to change you. And I left that alone. Like, meaning, when the revolution comes, we'll try to bring them to it. But I look at them and I say, you're not going to be helpful. And so I didn't look at them as advocates and allies. And sometimes I found more powerful white allies than I found black allies in institutions. And that's sad, but I think we call that what it is. I call that internalized white supremacy. If those folks are to be transformed, here's what I can say. So, until I went to Howard, I was on tap to be a black person like that, who disdained black people and was largely white identified. Because my entire childhood I was bullied because I liked to read. So white kids were hostile with black kids, said, you a white girl. So I didn't have any black friends, so I went to Howard. And that's still a source of enmity when I'm back in my community. That I have to look at people who slap me in the face, call me names, threaten to fight me, for no other reason than that I was a smart black girl. That was my childhood. And it was not always happy. I think that black folks have to heal the trauma that they have around that. And I think that there are very few opportunities for many black people in these positions to do it, but I think if you talk to them, you'll find out. I've never met a black person who thinks in the way that you're describing that doesn't tell you some story about childhood trauma as it relates to not being accepted by black people. And so here's the thing. It matters to us what other black people think of us. And we gotta be really honest about saying that, right? That while we know that all black folks don't think alike, that we have emotional skin in the game with each other. And we do because we know that I might not have liked someone, I didn't know it, right? But I know that I could have been her. So what happened to her says something about what is possible for me. We got emotional skin in the game. So when people look like us, tell us that we're not anything, or that we're trying to be something other than what we are, right? Then they hurt us at a place of key trauma, at a place of key identification. And for me, the only thing that healed that was that I had 4 years of blackness. And it made a difference. And I met friends, my homegirl that I grew up with, who I love, she went to a white college. We grew up with the same kind of thing, where we both got teased mercilessly and so forth. And so she votes Republican a lot. She does. I feel like we grew up around the corner from each other. And I feel like it's sometimes a cautionary tale. You know, and while I believe in HBCUs, it's not so much about the HBCU as it is about how do we deal with the trauma we have with each other. Right? Here's the thing. One thing we as black folks know is that much of the violence we have experienced has come at the hands of other black people. The most violent crimes I've seen brothers commit against sisters. We have to be able to talk about that. We don't always want to talk about it because we don't want to pathologize ourselves. But that is one of the places that churches can help us. Because it's one of the few places that black people actually go every week where they might hear something about healing and about dealing with your heart stuff. I mean, I ain't saying you gotta go to church for it. I'm saying it's one place that can help with that problem. But also, so one of the things we've done in this movement that I think is really awesome, when we came to Ferguson last year as part of the Ferguson Rise, we brought a healing team with us. We brought a healing team. We brought people who took care of us as we marched. We brought people who did scream therapy, people who could do therapy, talk therapy, people who could do Reiki, people who could do acupuncture, people who could do massage, right? And so I think that we have to recognize that healing individual trauma, both inside the community and outside of it, is actually a part of the work. And so I think that those folks are suffering from trauma, and I don't think anyone has called it that for them before. But that's what I see when I look at them, before I turn my behind to them and keep on going. And it ain't because I don't love them, it's just that I don't have time for that. And sometimes we can say that too, we can set limits. I don't feel it's my job to struggle with every Negro that has a messed up mentality about things. And I don't, because I don't have time for that, right? And because some of those folks will run and tell white people exactly what you said in order to get more carrots. I think we have to reckon with the reality of that. Yes. Yes, brother, my friend. No.
I'm at the gathering.
Yes.
One of my observations was that you went to a major gathering, but it was also perhaps the first gathering of activist gathering of its kind in which the black church is considered.
Yes. Yeah.
The black church is not centered. In most instances, on the wrong side of the question.
Right.
So what is it for black religious scholars and intellectuals to consider? How do we begin to consider this alternative space, which is probably going to increase exponentially?
Yeah.
Given all the stuff we talk about the transform, given the way in which queer identity is centered in Black Lives Matter, and that there's a strong anti-sexual.
Yeah, I think that the church is going to have to change or it's going to get left behind. I think that's very simple. The church hasn't earned the right to have a central place in the movement because we've been a place that has done a lot of the damage in the way that we have preached and taught about who Jesus is for us. Right? We got like the best revolutionary spiritual narrative that anybody can have.
Wow.
That we could be teaching every Sunday. But that ain't what we're doing. We come in, we beat people over the head about individual sin. Who did you sleep with? Did you tell this lie? Did you, think an impure thought? We ask people to navel gaze as spiritual practice. And then we send them back out and tell them that that's all God requires of them. That's what we do. And we can do better. And the church, the black church, and I know my religious scholars don't like the black church. Okay, black churches of a particular ilk will be left behind if they don't earn their way back into the movement. And the way that I think that the church earns its way back is by actually telling the real story of who Jesus Christ was. Because that story is as compelling a revolutionary narrative as any I've seen. If you tell it right. But, and I see what you're doing, don't make me preach. I cannot stand you. But the preachers in the room know what I'm saying. Right? And so nobody is going to come if what they're going to do is leave out feeling like God doesn't have anything to do with them unless they go on a fast and give money that they don't have because the economy is terrible. Right? So that they can come and support a leadership that is not responsive to their needs. And that is what we keep on asking folks to do. And so the church has to change. We have to decide whose side are we on. Whose side are we on? Right? That's real clear. And if we teach our own story right, folks will break down the doors in this moment because they just want to hear that God cares about what is happening in black people. And it's not a thing that we hear enough. What we hear is that favor ain't fair and God. So this is my thing about that. What we keep preaching to people is that if they serve God, God will protect them from the exigencies of racism, sexism, and capitalism. That's what we keep on teaching them. That God's favor will make it so that capitalism won't keep you from having the things that you need. That's what we keep doing. So we don't actually ever ask them to think about what God might have to say about capitalism as a system that values profits over people in the first place.
Say it. Go ahead.
Right? So that's it. Right? Is that there are things in our narrative that ask us to challenge systems. And one of the things I asked before is when we take away people's old frameworks, what new frameworks do we give them? And I think that one of the new frameworks the church can give is to say that God is here for the questions we have to ask, and God invites us to ask questions about the systems in which we exist, and to see the problems in those systems, and to stand up and say, these systems are insufficient for our thriving. Right? Like, I think that's the thing we can give people is that, like, maybe there's a grand adventure of faith to go on around dismantling systems. Perhaps, possibly. And so that might not, mean that you're going to get 100% reinvestment on your tithe, but maybe if you give your tithe to that, then you will feel like you're participating in a revolution that is designed to change things. So those are some thoughts. Otherwise, the church doesn't deserve to be a part of this. It just doesn't. And people will keep coming for a prayer, and they'll keep coming to y'all for their turkey basket on Thanksgiving. And that's pretty, and y'all will have a bunch of real pretty buildings, and they'll mostly be empty every other time of the year. And if the church is good with that, then cool. The revolutionaries are good with that too.
Dr. Shaw.
Okay, I get this last one.
Yeah. We have one last one. The sister had a question first, so her hand from the National Council of Churches. But let me just say this: it's lunchtime, and I know some people have some dietary needs, physical, medical, like need to eat. So we'll go with that.
Actually, I just wanted to make real quick, when she said National Council of Churches, that would be the point that I come in. When we said, where is the church? I actually reached out and I was like, see, you are the church. Remy, you are the church. Remy, we are the church.
Yeah.
And so I just want us to begin, I want to hear us begin to speak differently about, quote unquote, the church. Because there's always been pockets of the church that is going to be doing the most holistic presentation of what it is we're trying to get done. And that larger voice has almost always been on kind of out there. So I just want us to always know that we are the church as much as the ones out there preaching all of the crazy stuff. So that was just my point.
Fair enough. Brother? Yeah.
So I'm actually reluctant to maybe just expand her to a question. We're working to try and build what we call a movement congregation, where we can actually have congregations that are intentionally situated all across the country in many cities that are just about food. And you're a pastor and less than a community whether they see your church or not. I'm interested in like what would the vision look like around movement scholarship, intellectual rigor for the work of particularly Black liberation, and how could we begin linking movement scholarship with movement clergy congregations? One of the things we continue to hear is most clergy just honestly don't know how to preach Black liberation. Society knows around Black liberation. We can beat them up on the head about why they can't do it, but how do we decide to transform them to do it in responsibility seminaries, Bible colleges, etc.
Well, so I'm going to leave that to the work of the positional statements that we're going to be doing later, and also to the work of the people with actual PhDs in church things, which I don't have. Thank you all so much.
So this is just a phenomenal way that we've started off. So we have each day, today and tomorrow, we have lunch. Let me say about lunch. Scholars did not come to Ferguson to not be a blessing. So the food that's provided are by Black-owned businesses. Very, very intentional about that. And the other thing is, I just want to recognize the members of the Black Scholars Coordinating Team. You know, in the Black Church, we say that to the end. So since we're sitting here a little bit over with the coordinating team, please stand. Members of the coordinating team, please stand. Just stand. Thank you all. Thank you all. And then finally, in your brochure, there are schools that have supported this work. And I just want to ask you to look at your brochures and be thankful. You know, there are schools that really are, you know, supporting Black scholars doing this work, and we're thankful for that. Not only are there schools, you know, we have a president of a seminary who's taking the time to come and be with us, and that's Dr. Alice Hunt, so I want to recognize her as an ally in the protest movement. We thank you for being here. Now, let's go have something to eat. Once we come back, Black scholars are going to try to, at least we may attend to that last question that came up, and we're going to be led in a conversation about how, we're going to talk about our work and how our work can help support the work of social justice within African American communities, and by doing that, how we improve the world in which we live. So I'm so thankful for you all for being here. Jay Cameron Carter, stand up, from Duke Divinity School, is going to be speaking to us this afternoon. Y'all gonna hang out for that. So thank you all for being here. Let's go get something to eat.